to hear what other counties are doing. It reminds us that we don't have to replicate many of the work and solutions and strategies that we're trying to do. I know that when I heard what Fresno is doing, it reminded me that there was a day where we were trying to learn of how we were going to do a better job of addressing homelessness in Monterey County. Josh Strand from Supervisor Phillips' office, my office, we closed shop. We drove to Fresno, to Pavarello House, to see what Fresno County was doing there. And we learned a lot of good lessons, a great approach, and it was good to hear your compassion for the residents of your county. Then we packed up another day. We went to the navigation centers in San Francisco to also learn what they were doing there as well. And then on ADUs, we know that we didn't have to replicate that work. We did a proposal to try to do and replicate what Santa Cruz County is doing as well. We always reshape it. We fit it a little differently to fit our own local communities, but it's important to be inspired and to hear the great work happening in other counties, and we hope to advance more of that. But as people mentioned, to do housing, it's not an easy thing. To do shelters housing, you have to face NIMBYism, you have to address issues of water, zoning, permitting. But in this workshop, we're also talking about the need for funding. And as a former state legislator, I was there during the time when we were facing a $26 billion deficit back in 2010, 2011. The governor, at the time, Governor Brown, had proposed eliminating redevelopment agencies all across the state of California. I was only one of 3 Democrats to vote not to do that because of the important, it was an important tool to bring jobs and economic development to disadvantaged communities. But the 20% set aside was the biggest funding source for local governments, cities and counties to construct affordable housing. I think a year, it was $1 billion lost just on the 20% set aside by eliminating redevelopment. And that doesn't include the private dollars, the public-private partnerships that we use to stretch those dollars. So if you can imagine now, 6-7 years later, how many billions? We're $6 or $7 billion that we haven't had as local governments to construct housing. So it's exacerbated the problem. But here comes in January, new governor Gavin Newsom released his proposed budget, and I was very inspired to hear that he's going to continue to make housing a top priority. Not only putting money forward, but trying to push local governments to do more and meet their housing needs. But he mentioned that his goal was to build, I think the number was 3.5 million units of housing by 2025. 3.5 million by 2025. And that is just to meet the current needs in our state. There was another report at the same time that said in order to do that, we need about 250,000 construction workers to build that high volume of housing. So it's a big challenge ahead of us. But today on this panel, we want to start fleshing some of those ideas out. All of these 3 individuals here are key leaders in our local community, championing to build more housing for farm workers, to housing for our homeless, housing for other employees and community residents. We do have really high rent charges here in our county. But I really want to commend them because just like many of you and all the staff that are committed to doing this work, you guys are true champions. We need people who are going to advocate to do this work, to overcome the resistance that we get when we build housing or homeless shelters. And we have to do it in a way that demonstrates dignity and respect for everyone in our community, especially our poorest residents. I always like saying when we take care of the least among us, we lift up everyone up in our communities. And so to do that, it's important for us to gather like we're doing today and hopefully inspire each other and go back and learn and carry out the work that we're committed to. I just wanted to bring up some points. As I mentioned earlier, the legislature had passed a major housing funding and policy package in 2017. That was Senate Bill 2 by Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins. It creates a permanent funding stream for affordable housing through a new document recording fee. Starting in 2019, $250 million every year in formula funds and competitive grants will be allocated to local governments to support housing development and rental assistance. Another cornerstone of the 2017 package was Proposition 1 that the voters of California approved, and it was supported by CSAC and approved by voters last November. And that will create $3 billion in general obligation bonds for affordable housing development and an additional $1 billion for veterans home ownership programs. Finally, voters in 2018 approved Proposition 2, which authorizes $2 billion in funding against Mental Health Services Act funds to build permanent supportive housing for people experiencing mental illness in every county in our state. This funding is bolstered by over $700 million in one-time funding in the 2018-2019 budget for homelessness services and support. And we all know that counties will be key players in each of these new funding programs, but relationships with non-governmental partners, including affordable housing developers and community-based organizations providing assistance, will be vital as well. Our next panel will discuss how counties can prepare to work with non-governmental partners to maximize new opportunities to house the homeless and provide affordable homes. I will just introduce them, and then we'll take one by one. So first of all, I'm really proud of our good friend, Alfred Diaz-Infante, is a longtime president and CEO of Community Housing Improvement Systems and Planning Association of Salinas, or otherwise known as CHISPA. It's the largest private nonprofit housing developer based here in Monterey County. Since its incorporation in 1980, CHISPA has built and renovated more than 2,500 single-family homes and apartments for low and moderate-income people in Monterey, San Benito, and Santa Cruz counties. After him, we have Jane Royer Barr, is the Associate Director of Real Estate Development for Eden Housing, a nonprofit affordable housing developer. She covers the Monterey Bay region for Eden Housing, and she also serves as the Housing Program Manager for Monterey County. Well, she served as a Housing Program Manager for Monterey County, and prior to that, she was the Project Manager for Mid-Peninsula Housing. And lastly, my good friend, and we work very closely on our Continuum of Care, Katherine Turney is the Executive Officer for the Coalition of Homeless Service Providers for Monterey and San Benito County's Continuum of Care. And I really want to thank them and give them all a big round of applause, everybody. We're glad to have you here today.
First of all, I just wanted to tell you about Eden Housing. Our mission is to build and maintain high-quality, well-managed, service-enhanced, affordable housing communities that meets the needs of lower-income families, seniors, and partners with disability. We're the oldest nonprofit in California. We were started in '68. We just had our 50th anniversary, and if you go on our website, we've got a great section called 50 Years, 50 Stories, and we did a story a week, basically, of families and projects. These stats now are dated. We're probably at about 11,500 affordable units and about 166 properties. Family, senior, disabled, veterans, supportive housing. We have another company that is property management, and we have a third corporation that does resident services for families and for seniors. The services are different depending upon the clientele in our projects. There's never been greater awareness of the need for housing of all types and all cost ranges, and there's nothing better than a crisis to raise awareness. The state did a study in 2018 called California's Housing Future, Challenges and Opportunities, and it provided the following stats. These are a little dated now from 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, but production averaged less than 80,000 new homes annually over the last 10 years prior to 2017, I believe, and ongoing production continues to fall far below the projected need of 180,000 additional homes annually. Lack of supply and rising costs are compounding growing inequality and limiting advancement opportunities for younger Californians. We don't think of those kids coming out of college trying to find jobs and trying to find housing and what their choices are. Continued sprawl will decrease affordability and quality of life while increasing transportation costs. If you're stuck on the freeway, I live in Santa Cruz County and I commute up to Hayward once a month, and the worst part of my commute is in Santa Cruz County on Highway 1. Because too many people trying to get to jobs from South Monterey County up to Santa Cruz or from South Watsonville up to Scotts Valley or vice versa. The majority of California renters, more than 3 million households, pay more than 30% of their income toward rent, and nearly 1/3, more than 1.5 million households, pay more than 50% of their income toward rent. Overall home ownership rates are at their lowest since the 1940s in California. And California is home to 12% of the nation's population, but we have a disproportionate, this says 22% of the nation's homelessness population. I think we're up to 25% is the last statistics I saw. So this is not just about affordable housing today, it's also a supply issue. We need to, as affordable housing provider, we'll typically house people who make about 15-20% up to about 60% of the area median income. There is a possibility now with changes in tax credits that we can go up to 80%. It has to be balanced out by 20% units, so we're doing a little of that. There's moderate housing, which is for people making 80 to 120% of the area median income. Workforce housing, in some counties you have that, it's maybe 120 to 160% of your area median income being different for each county, and market rate. We need housing at all levels to meet what we need for supply. So affordable housing finance is complicated, competitive, and can take years to accumulate. Recent political changes, loss of RDA funding, and new sources of funding have changed the model that we worked under for years and decades. Typically, but not always, the bulk of the financing is made possible by the award of federal low-income housing tax credits. I'll explain that in a little bit. A limited partnership would be set up and consist of a general partner, which is the affordable housing developer, and a limited partner, the entity that provides the equity by purchasing tax credits that we are awarded through a federal program to the states. And that's typically a bank. It used to be other corporations, PG&E or other corporations back in the day, but now it's pretty much financial institutions. To get to a finished product, it takes time, hard work, and partners. So I'm going to talk about how the money works, and then I put sheets on your table. We'll go through those different funding sources in a second. Sounds like a lot of money, but it's still a tough road to go down. Pay now, this is market-driven public programs, tax credits that I talked about, and tax-exempt bonds. Tax credits were started in the 80s by the federal government, and what it does is it is money allocated by federal government comes through the states, and we apply for tax credits on a project when we have all of our other sources of financing identified. If we're awarded tax credits, we go out, we send a package out to investors, and we look for bids, and then we choose the best partner. The tax credit partner will come in. Let's say I have I've been allocated $20 million on a project. Tax credit partner will come in, and while I might have been given $20 million from tax credit, they in the past, before Trump, we not unusually get $1.14 on those credits. The day Trump came in, not when he passed his tax bill, but the day he came in, those dropped down to about 85 cents. We're back up to around $1 now, but it's market driven. So they will come in, they'll give us the money during construction, and then part of it right after we achieve 95% occupancy for 3 months. And they get a credit against the taxes they owe. So only those corporations that think they're going to make tax, and when you have a tax cut by Trump, that changes the scenario for them. They'll get a credit of that each year for 10 years, a tenth of that. So they get their money back through the tax credit. They also get the depreciation as a limited partnership. They get the depreciation of the real estate, so that's a further benefit. And finally, for the banks, they can get the Community Reinvestment Act credit, and banks need that. So there are the fourth big win is they can advertise that they're doing something great in the community. So that's how the tax credits work. There's deferred soft subordinated debt. That can be local, state, or federal deferred loans. And there's make your partner pay. So we might work with a market rate partner, and they have to do a certain percentage of inclusionary housing, maybe 15 or 20%. They bring us in the deal. We take that burden off of them and do it in regard to free land and sometimes subsidy contributions. Or it can go through a jurisdiction where the market rate housing developer pays for some land they're buying that's jurisdictionally owned, and then the jurisdiction will lend money to us. Pay later model can combine with this. Tenants can come to us with a Section 8 housing voucher, and then they only have to pay 30% of the combined amount of their rent and utilities. There are also Section 8 project-based vouchers that can be awarded to projects, and typically that would be 25%. It's more if you've got a senior project or disabled people. And finally, direct operating subsidies and sinking funds for deficits. It can be paid with an offsetting benefit. There are social impact bonds. There's healthcare investment into projects. There's green and sustainability, the cap and trade dollars, PG&E retrofit funding, Fannie Mae green loans. And there's teacher housing, which often are funded by the school district doing certificate of participation bonds to pay for a project they want to build on their own land. And then there's paid with other people's money. It says private equity, the Friends and Family Fund. That's kind of a joke, but when you're trying to raise the money for a project, you're going everywhere you can. And so it can be housing trusts, it can be nonprofits, community foundations, and new affordable equity funds, housing partnership equity trust. So those are some of the ways we make things work. I just was going to show you a couple of the projects here. This is a project in Hayward, and we had public money, public land, and we had money from partners to make this one work. This was an inclusionary housing project in Dublin, and we were doing the inclusionary housing for a market rate project. So we got the land from them. This is Valor Crossing in Dublin, VASH, Veterans Housing money for that. The healthcare Cottonwood Place project is, and I'm going to look at my notes, we had a partner on LOC, and they're a Medicare PACE provider, and they co-located with us. They paid for their facility, but we were able to share certain infrastructure costs and land costs, et cetera. So that was a great partnership, is a great partnership. In regard to sustainability, there are funds available for, this is an existing property that we got HUD grants, and their lending programs to green up existing properties, and that's important. Paying with other people's money, this is Savannah at Southport in Sacramento. This was an ACK rehab. This is a housing partnership with an equity trust, a REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust, as co-owner with 80% equity partner. So nice model. And here, finally, cap and trade. You apply for the cap and trade. It's very, very competitive, but we got it on a project in Richmond, California. So I'm going to go through how the money works. For later, you have these sheets. And if you didn't get sheets, if you want to contact me, I can send you by email. I ran out of a few of them. There are more people here than I realized. But this basically goes through some of these funds on those sheets. So federal, there's CDBG awards, not as important to affordable housing developers because it's limited to infrastructure. It can help, but it's not a really big amount. The home program or project funds awarded to a jurisdiction can be used for new construction and ACK rehab, and that's a great help. And then tax credits, which I already talked about. In regard to the state, these resources include the Housing and Community Development HCD programs awarded to affordable housing developers, such as in ongoing problems, you have home funds. There's direct entitlement. Unfortunately, in the 20 years ago when I was doing this, the state might be issuing 12, 15 awards a year. They're down to maybe 4 these days, which is unfortunate. The Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities, that's the cap and trade. That's out there. It's extremely competitive, and it's very hard to get it. There is a rural or non-urban portion of that funding, but it's very difficult to get. So while I'm going to talk about a lot of funds, not all these are easy to get. So home's not easy to get because it's limited. This is not easy to get for this group of counties because of it's really oriented to the urban areas. The Veterans Housing and Homeless Prevention, VHHP, which are VASH vouchers, that's a good source. And Emergency Solutions Grant Program, I'm going to let Katherine talk about that. And the SB2, Building Jobs and Homeless Act, the dedicated source, we in the business call this as perm source of financing. And that's what Luis had mentioned is the $75 recording fee. It can be up to $3. It's not on the sale of houses. So out of that is CASH, the California Emergency Solutions Housing. I think Katherine's going to talk about that as well. Starting in year 2, there's direct funding to jurisdictions if you're an entitlement jurisdiction. If not, you're going to have to go through a competitive process at the state. There are right now in the year 1 planning grants for the jurisdictions planning how to plan and get in a position to use these funds. And there is a component of this that's a farm worker set aside, which is great. No Place Like Home, Prop 2, there's a competitive and non-competitive portion of that, and that's for mental health, people with mental health issues. The SB 3 Veterans and Affordable Housing Bond Act, that was the Prop 1 that we passed in the fall. That includes a multifamily housing program that's coming back from when we used to have Prop 46 and 1C, if you remember those decades ago. It's a great program and a good source, and a lot of us will depend upon that. Cal Home, the Joe Cerna Jr. Farm Worker Program, Cerna for farm workers, that's great. I'm a little upset right now. I don't know, I haven't seen the final regs, but in the draft regs for MHP, before you could combine sources, they're not going to allow you to combine farm worker and MHP anymore, which, so we sent in comments to the state and we told them that we thought it was discriminatory, but I haven't seen the final regs on that. Local Housing Trust Fund, Infill Infrastructure Grant Program, that's somewhat difficult, and the Transit-Oriented Development Housing Program, that can be pretty tough competition. Other state funds, Cal Home Disaster, if you have a disaster. Another portion of the multifamily housing program is for supportive housing. Housing for a Healthy California program. There's still the Mobile Home Park Resident Ownership Program if you want to work with mobile home parks to buy their mobile home park from the owner and become individual owners, and a National Housing Trust Fund program. As regard to local funding, jurisdictional funding, these resources can include free land or land lease at a nominal fee, funds from inclusionary housing in lieu fees, commercial linkage fees, general funds or other sources created through local bonds or sales taxes, streamlining of the entitlement and or building process and priority processing, reductions or delays or deferment in collecting impact and or building permit fees. Those are really all important. Anything that can keep the process moving and we can get a project through quicker. We pay interest on the money we borrow to buy the land or to pay the architect and all the consultants as we're getting our building permits. So we cut that time down. That helps a lot. The housing resource, the Housing Authority is a great resource for the project-based HUD vouchers, and we really appreciate the partnerships that we have with them. Other sources are nonprofits, foundations, and other agencies, such as the Federal Home Loan Bank's Affordable Housing Program. That's an interesting one. We can get about $10,000 a unit, and every little bit helps. That came back out in I think it was the 90s from the savings and loans doing bad stuff, and so money was set aside and put with the Federal Home Loan Bank, and it's now dedicated to affordable housing, a portion of that, so that's great. So how does affordable housing really get built? There are key ingredients: land, surplus governmental land, counties, cities, schools, Metro, Caltrans, air rights above existing county buildings. It's really important. We have to make good use of all of the opportunities that might be there. Reincarnating redevelopment, so we're not dependent upon short-term benefits of bonds. That the bond that just passed the funds will probably be gone in about 6 years at best. With a 1.5 to 2 year lead in. So it's a very short period of time that we'll have those funds. While we do have that perm source of financing now, the $75 recording fee, it's about a fifth, maybe a quarter, but of what RDA redevelopment funds used to be. So it's not replacing what we had. And so if we can bring redevelopment back, that would be wonderful. Partnerships with people in the community as far as health or other ag groups, whatever we can do. And local funds and or assistance are all key ingredients. There's an estimate about 200 bills being put forth right now in the legislature in California. So you have a Democratic Assembly, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic governor, and when that all turned out to work out at the as the election finished, I heard a lobbyist say, "Boy, is Newsom in trouble," because they're high expectations, and you can see with 200 bills being put forth. But I listed 6 here that's really important for the counties to support, and you work on getting these passed. The first one, AB 1486, creates more affordable homes by clarifying and strengthening key provisions of the Surplus Land Act. SB 50, which is Wiener's bill, creates more housing near transit, increases affordable housing opportunities in historically exclusionary communities, and provides critical tenant protections. Might not be as critical to you in your counties that are more rural, but it's an important one. The ones in red are really, really important. Work on those. Send your letters in of support. ACA 1 supports local communities' ability to secure local affordable housing investments by lowering the vote approval to 55% on affordable housing revenue measures. That will require 2/3 votes to change. But I worked hard for 2 years in Santa Cruz County on Measure H, which is housing bond, and we got 56% of the vote. So it did not pass because it required 2/3. If we can get this changed, we can get a lot of money into your local community. That's important as a match for all these state funds and federal funds that we go after. Often you have to have matches. So it's either upon the jurisdiction to come up with a match by giving us land or giving us funds, or if we have housing bonds, it's going to work a lot better and we'll be able to do more deals. SCA 1, again, is going to require a 2/3 vote. There's something called Article 34, which requires that cities can't develop, construct, or acquire any low-income housing without a majority vote of taxpayers. We've been able to get around it, but it would be better to clean this up. AB 10 is important. It creates more affordable homes by expanding the state's low-income housing tax credits. So there are tax credits on a federal level. There's also state income tax credits. The more tax credits we have, the more projects that can be built. So that's an important one to support. And SB 9, Bells, increases the state's ability to create more affordable homes through increasing the value of the state low-income housing tax credit by removing the sunset on certification. So right now we're good. It's going to sunset, so we need to keep this going. So if you do nothing else, work on those 3. So get educated. Use local resources such as affordable housing developers to host special study sessions and/or community meetings to explain to the public what we do, how it's done, how there are partnerships. And that's going to reduce the NIMBYism that you're going to see at some of those meetings if you don't do that. You can contact the Nonprofit Housing Association. I put their website here and their phone number. They have information on all of these bills, usually one-pager. They also have prepared support letters that you can send in. And finally, we encourage you to lobby, to use your lobbyists at the state and federal levels to change things. So I'm going to turn it over to Alfred. I'm going to talk a little bit about some local ways to improve things, and then and I might wrap up right after he finishes where I'm going to take him on the end, and then Katherine will be talking.
Thank you, Jane. I'm going to go through some quick slides just to give you a sense of what CHISPA does and who we are. We have a mission, as all nonprofit organizations. Our mission is to improve people's lives and create healthy neighborhoods, and we do that by developing, selling, owning, and managing affordable homes. We're a nonprofit. We have our umbrella company is a development company. We have our own property management company. We have our own general construction company. We've been around for 39 years. I have a board of directors, and we've built quite a bit of number of units, apartments, 1,200, and about 800 homes. We have strong emphasis on strengthening communities through resident services, similar to what Eden Housing does. And I'll go through these slides really fast, but I always like to give the audience an idea of what affordable housing looks like, in case you may not know what it looks like. So here are some apartments we completed in Hollister about a couple of years ago. Family apartments, 3 and 4 units. Additional family apartments, this is in South Monterey County in the city of Greenfield. And then we also do senior housing. Right now we actually have 2 senior housing developments under construction, one in the city of Marina and one in the city of Hollister. And I mentioned the community services. That's really kind of the heart and soul of the work that we do within the apartment complexes for both the apartments for families and for seniors. We have very active resident services. We partner with various nonprofit organizations. Here are some of the logos. They're the ones that really actually provide their services. And I want to point that out because affordable housing, the work that nonprofit organizations do, it's not just about building units, really it's about building a community. And we do that through the various partnerships that we have with organizations such as the Girl Scouts, the YMCA, local community colleges, Boys and Girls Club, and so forth. And then we also do single-family homes. We're fortunate to work in the area. We work in the Tri-County area of Monterey County, Santa Cruz County, and San Benito County that we're still able to do home ownership. And this is a subdivision, small subdivision that we completed in Hollister. And our focus for these units are for moderate-income families. In the county of San Benito, that's a family earning anywhere from $80,000 to $90,000 a year. Here's a single-family home subdivision we built down in the city of Greenfield down in South Monterey County. And then this is a small infill subdivision that we built in the city of Salinas. I'll talk about the RENA numbers a little bit later, but I'm going to make a statement that will probably catch your attention, and that is that money alone is not the solution. Okay? Money alone is not the solution. It's part of the solution. Money definitely helps. Jane covered that. We coordinated our presentation. Having money is really awesome. But advocacy is really critical. Advocacy at the state level and the local level. That money that's coming down the pike, it happened because many of us, affordable housing advocates, have relationships with other organizations up in Sacramento and up and down the state, have been advocating very strongly for additional funding and policies that allow us to do the work that we do. The other thing that's important is leadership. It's important to have leadership and champions at the local level that will push for affordable housing policies and practices. And then third is having a very knowledgeable staff. I'm really, really happy to see that CSAC has this topic on its agenda for today. The more that your staff knows about how our affordable housing developments come together, the more they know about the policies and regulations out there, that's really going to help us tremendously. I happen to sit on 2 statewide boards. I sit on the board of Housing California, which is the largest nonprofit organization, not only in California, but in the country, I understand. And then the other board I sit on is the California Coalition for Rural Housing, which focuses specifically in advocating for funding and policies in rural counties and cities. It was mentioned earlier by Supervisor Alejo and Jane that we had a very successful 2017 legislative year. We got 15 housing bills passed, which is bringing the money. In fact, I want to put a plug in with respect to staff being knowledgeable. Housing California is having its housing conference in April. That's next month, April 15th, 16th, and 17th. It's the largest affordable housing conference in the country. Many of the staff from the State Department of Housing Community Development will be there. Many of the staff from other of the major agencies that provide funding for affordable housing will be there. And we probably expect, I think the latest count I got is we expect about 1,500 people. I recommend it to all the staff. If you have time, you have money in your budget, send your staff, because that's where they're going to learn about how this affordable housing comes together. And I mentioned leadership. I want to acknowledge Supervisor Alejo, because when that 2017 legislative package was approved, I kept bugging him, telling him, hey, Supervisor Alejo, there's money coming down the pike. We need to get your staff ready so that when that money comes, we're in the best position to get that funding together and to take advantage of that. So first meeting of the year, when he took the gavel as the chair, he put a request, one of those Board of Supervisor referrals, and said, hey, I want to know, how is the county of Monterey meeting its goals with respect to its housing elements? And what can we do to prepare? That's what it takes. It takes leadership at the local level, having a champion that's going to say, hey, you know what? I want my staff to be prepared. The other thing is I want to thank you for thinking of us as partners. I know the question that you have here is how are counties and non-government partners planning to maximize upcoming opportunities? Well, I appreciate that, because we are partners. You know, we can't do it by ourselves. We need all of you that work for government to help us through that process. And then the other thing that we do here at the local level and the regional level is advocacy. That advocacy happens not only in Sacramento, but it happens here at the local level. And we're fortunate to be members, Eden Housing, CHISPA, and then Mid-Peninsula Housing, and some of the major local corporations and educational institutions are part of the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. It's a regional organization that is advocating for basically in 3 areas: housing, particularly affordable housing, transportation, economic development. That local advocacy is really critical. It's critical, and it has had some impact so far. For example, in Santa Cruz County, the county of Santa Cruz already has adopted impact fee deferrals. So the impact fees that are charged to developers, those fees are paid at the end, typically. Well, what we've been asking for and advocating for is to have those fees paid once the certificate of occupancy is permitted, because the impact really doesn't happen when you break ground. The impact happens when people are moving in. The other type of things that we've been doing collectively here through MBEP, which is the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, is advocating for a streamlining process, particularly for ADUs, accessory dwelling units. We're looking to see how can we add additional units within our existing neighborhoods, and how do we streamline that process. The Supervisor Alejo mentioned Santa Cruz County. They've already come up with a really good template. That template is a template that others have been borrowing. The city of Salinas has been looking at that as well, and recently adopted just this week a streamlining recommendation for ADUs. And the other thing that we did, and this started actually 2 years ago as we were preparing for additional funding, in Monterey County, agriculture is the #1 industry. In Santa Cruz County, very large agricultural industry as well. So we got together, many of the local governments, Santa Cruz County, Monterey County, and the various cities in these counties got together and put their money together to conduct what's known as the Salinas Valley and Pajaro Valley Farm Worker Housing Study and Action Plan. And the person who led that, actually, it's in our room, Anastasia Wyatt, did an awesome job. She's now worked for the County of Monterey, but when she was the city of Salinas, she led a number of other local government staff and nonprofits and other advocates to put this study together, which now puts us in a really great position to be able to access housing, funding for farm worker housing. Prop 1 has, I think it's $300 million for farm worker housing. SB 2, which is the permanent source of funding. There's ongoing permanent source of about $25 million for farm worker housing. So the fact that we have this study is going to help us tremendously, that we have the data to demonstrate that we have a need for farm worker housing. And the other thing that MBEP has been instrumental in, those of us that have come together here in the region, was to work together on getting a local housing bond passed. Jane talked about that. We passed in Monterey County. We did some initial polling, but we want to do that, or we want to continue to meet and consider a local housing bond in November 2020. Santa Cruz County, in this past election, the bond unfortunately failed at 55%, and that's why ACA 1, which would lower the threshold from 2/3 to 55%, is going to be important. One of the things that we're noticing as we see how other counties have been successful in passing local housing bonds, like Alameda County, Santa Clara County, a lot of the state funding is going towards into those counties because they have that local match. And some of us who work in some of the rural counties, like Monterey County, San Benito County, and Santa Cruz County, we don't have that local match. And that's why having that local housing bond would be really critical. And then I also talked about having knowledgeable staff, and I did want to bring up one of the other, laws that's out there. Many years ago when I was doing project management, I remember talking to a planner about the state density bonus law, and we had a development that we were proposing. And I was really surprised to hear the planner said, well, that's just kind of a state thing, like as if local government doesn't need to abide by that. But the fact is, there is a state density bonus law. It's a law. So when affordable housing applicants or developers come in, there's densities increases that we're allowed to get by law. And not only densities, but also reductions in certain setbacks and certain things. So again, it's really important that your staff understands what's currently on the books. Then I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the regional housing needs allocation. This is for our region here in the Monterey Bay area. And the reason I want to bring it up is because Governor Newsom is starting to question, how valid these numbers are. And I'm not sure if everybody knows how these numbers are put together, what the methodology is. But the RENA numbers, we're now in our 5th cycle. There's a study that just came out, I think last month. It's called Missing the Mark by Beacon Economics. And it's a really great study. I'd recommend you to get that report. And one of the things that they mentioned in that report, that the RENA numbers are really projecting future housing needs based on population growth, based on job creation and household formations. What the RENA numbers do not represent is previous cycles deficits. So if your county did not reach the RENA numbers in the past 4 cycles, there have been 5 cycles, those numbers don't get automatically added to your future cycle. That's why we have a housing crisis. We just haven't kept up. So even if you say, hey, we achieved our goal, we built our RENA numbers this last cycle, it doesn't mean like you saw the solution of our affordable housing crisis. We still have a major deficit. And the governor's paying attention to that. He's saying, you know what, I'm wondering, thinking about maybe looking at that more closely. Maybe we need to look at those numbers differently. Oh, so one of the things I mentioned, the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership. So one of the things that we're also doing, again, I say we because we're members, is holding local governments accountable. This is, call out Monterey County. The RENA number, or the goal for the year, from the planning period of 2014 to 2023 is 7,386 units. As of the end of 2017, all the jurisdictions in the county of Monterey, we've only achieved about 18.5% of the units. So already we're behind. And so I think it's important for counties to continue to look at how are we doing. And to every year, beginning of the year, ask your staff, hey, I want to see a report. How are we doing and what do we need to do? What things do we need to put in place? What is it that our staff needs to do so that we can achieve, and beyond just our goals for our current cycle RENA numbers, but beyond that. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jane. You want to wrap up a few more things?
On this RENA, for your housing element, there's an annual program report due every year. I'm sorry to say that in the 3 counties in Monterey, all 3 counties, you're up to date. Congratulations. But out of the 21 jurisdictions, only 7 of them are up to date. And last fall, I saw the first RFP from the state. It was actually a Caltrans one. And the first paragraph said, you may not apply if you are not up to date with your APRs. So if you think about this as only a housing issue, you're wrong. This will affect you getting transportation dollars, all are the state dollars. So it's really important, finally. And don't sit here and think you're okay as a county, because you're affected in your county by the cities in your county, and you need to be talking with them at your monthly meetings or wherever and tell them they need to get up to date, because housing just can't be built in the county unincorporated areas. It needs to be built in the cities. So I'm going to go back really quickly to review affordable housing. We find the land, we entitle it, we hire the geotech, the phase 1, the architect, and the civil. And during that time period, we're finding our funding. We're first going to local jurisdictions, applying for state funds, and then finally, when we have everything else in place, we go to apply for tax credits, and hopefully we're successful in all those. We submit for the building permit, we construct, and we occupy, and hopefully everyone's happy at the grand opening, because we've got some more units that serve our homeless as well as local residents, and you do and should be doing preferences for your local residents. So I'm going to give you the bullet points of what counties can do, because there's lots you can do. You can review and streamline the process for approval of projects. You can dedicate an employee as a guide between developers and planning, public works, et cetera. When I worked at the County of Monterey as a housing program manager, that was a large part of my job. And there were often questions, and I just acted as, talking with the departments and saying, this is how this works, what can we do? You can accelerate land use approval. The average is 6 months for simple projects and 39 months with projects with EIRs. That costs money and time. So anything you can do, accelerate, that's great. You can educate your staff. They need to understand the enhanced density bonus law, and we affordable housing developers are there to help out with that. You can redevelop commercial spaces in regard to the requirements right now for mixed use. A lot of counties and jurisdictions require, if you do mixed use, you're going to have 50% retail and 50% housing. That doesn't work anymore. People are shopping online, and your retail is more like restaurants and bars, et cetera. So you need to look at those percentages again and reduce the amount of retail that an affordable housing project has to carry. Identifying land, vacant, underutilized airspace over government buildings, and reuse. Undertake specific plans and use your community plans. The City of Santa Cruz did a specific plan. I'm hoping to do a project downtown there. It's great. Instead of having to come in and do CEQA and lose all that time, it's done for you. And as long as I build to the density and build architecturally as I go up on floors, I sit back, et cetera, and match that, I'm in quickly, and that's important. Wattsville's in the process of doing that right now, and that's an important step, and I hope you all are looking at that. Identify funds, RDA, a home, SB2 that you're going to be getting that can be put into affordable housing. Look at revised fees, lower fees. One of the main things that can really help immediately, charge fees on a per square foot basis, not on a unit basis. I reopened a couple sections of Fort Ord, and I had apartments that were 600 square feet, and I was paying the same fees as 5,500 square foot houses that KB Homes was building. It's not right. So that's something you can do to help to change your fees on a per square foot basis. You can delay fees or waive them, and try to align your developer fees with housing objectives. Review and update your inclusionary housing program. Encourage both affordable and market rate supply, so be fair in looking at that. Incentivize 80-20 development, so a market rate developer comes in with 80% and they have a partner of 20% and work with those, work to attract those market rate developers. Be open to new technology. You hear a lot about modular housing. We're looking at our first project of doing that. It's about 4 months of land work. They can bring those units in and set about 12 a day. And then you've got other final landscaping and facade and some other things, but it really will cut a lot of time out of our construction process. It's supposed to save a lot of money right now. It's not saving as much as we would hope, and I think it's because there's such competitiveness now. There's, these contractors can name whatever price they want because there are not enough workers right now. Try to attract new investors in housing through changes, these above changes. Stay up to date with APRs, and finally, make sure to lobby for that 55% bond.
Katherine Turney, as she knows, she has the Coalition of Homeless Providers here in Monterey County. They administer our continuum of care, but this person is really key in learning all the different rules and regulations at the federal and state level, making sure we're drawing down those resources for our community. A year ago when I became a little bit over a year ago when I became the chair of our continuum of care, she can attest. There wasn't much excitement. There wasn't the most attended meetings in the county. But as soon as the HEAP money came around, and now we're talking about millions of dollars, we got a packed room now, right? People... we were talking about doing a shelter in Salinas, a permanent one, maybe one in the peninsula. There was no interest and a lot of divisiveness. When that money came around, the peninsula cities came forward, the Salinas and the county were partnering, and now we got two good proposals that we've been working on, and we're very close to hopefully being realized. And when we found out that Monterey and San Benito County, through the HEAP funding, could draw down $12.5 million, I even asked Katherine, what does it feel to get a $12.5 million check? As soon as she got it in January, she took a photo, sent it to everybody. I posted on social media, because now we got some resources to really do something. But as we all know, it's only phase one. We need a lot more to be able to really address this crisis, and I'm glad the governor has now committed to bringing round two, hopefully in this year's budget, to make that happen. So I want to give another round of applause. Please welcome Katherine Turney, everybody.
I'd like to thank Supervisor Alejo for inviting me here. I'd also like to thank my two colleagues to the right of me, because I must tell you, when you see those PowerPoint photographs of that affordable housing up on that screen, you are really looking at, for each project, years and years of time and sweat and expertise and begging for money and bringing we're looking for water and bringing a project online. So they really are, instrumental in meeting our needs in our community. I'm here today to talk about homelessness. I come to you from a little different perspective. In our community, and when I say our community, I mean our continuum, which is Monterey and San Benito County, which have different dynamics in both of those counties. On any given night in Monterey County, 2,800 people are homeless. On any given night in San Benito County, 500 people are homeless. 75 to 79% of those people are unsheltered. Unsheltered means I'm living in a place not meant for human habitation. I'm living in an alleyway or a tent or a car or an RV or behind Safeway or wherever I'm living. I'm living by myself or I'm living with my children. I'm fleeing a domestic violence situation. Or I just got banged by the economy. Maybe I worked a minimum wage job and 40 hours a week paid for my apartment for a while, but then they raised my rent, and I couldn't afford that apartment any longer. And for a while, then my landlord said, okay, you can use your security deposit for a month's rent. And then that wasn't enough, and so I lost my apartment. So my friends let me stay on their couch for a while, but then they got tired of that, because now I'm jeopardizing their housing. Next thing you know, I'm living in my car. And I'm able to kind of maintain the illusion for a while because my car is clean. I can slip into the gas station. My makeup bag is full, right? I can go to the laundromat. But after a while, those convenience store owners get hip to what I'm doing, right? So they're shooing me away. And now my car has a problem. Next thing you know, my transmission blows. I can't afford that. Now I'm out of my car. Next thing you know, I'm one of those people living behind Safeway or in the tent and trying to just claw my way back. And for some people, it's because I have a mental illness that I need treatment for, and I struggle or I grapple with that. Or, unfortunately, I had a back injury, 3 years ago and was overprescribed opioids, and now I'm, 3 years ago was all about, the Percocet. Now I use heroin because it's cheaper, and now I can't get out of that, right? Homelessness is more complicated than you ever want to even know. Once you start kind of going down the elements that bring people to experience a state in a condition where they're unhoused, you think you got it, but you will jump down the rabbit hole. There are 20, 30, 40 presenting reasons why people are homeless, conflated with affordable housing issues. You can't separate the two, right? In order to house homeless people, you have to have affordable housing. And as both Jane and Alfred so wisely told you, A, we don't have enough because we haven't been keeping up like we should have been. And B, to bring projects online is extremely, it's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and all that time, more people are falling into homelessness. So what do? Right? Well, you turn on your TV every night, and you see around the country more and more news spots or newspaper articles or Facebook posts about the encampment in San Francisco or in Dallas or in New York or in Minnesota. They're going up and up and up. California has 25% of the entire homeless population in the country. It is a challenge that is so hard to solve that you can just get stuck in a spiral, and I've seen many, many communities, including ours for a while, do that. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I am happy to say that we did kind of stop this insanity, and we stopped the spinning a couple years ago. And the first thing that we did was we restructured what we call the Leadership Council. In the Leadership Council, every community in the country that has a continuum of care, which is everyone, has some kind of what they call a continuum of care board. And they name it a bunch of different things, right? We call ours the Leadership Council. Supervisor Alejo chairs it for us. And we restructured it because he's right. That body had sat for several years. It was lacking inertia. The problem was so big, what do we do? And you're in that spiral, right? So we restructured it in such a way that we placed more community decision makers on that board. So it became much more powerful, if you will, and started to look at regional perspectives. Because one of the biggest traps is silo living, right? So if you're in a county and if you have 10 cities, I don't know, in your county. And if each city's doing its own thing, and the county's doing its own thing, and the affordable housing developers and the for-profit developers, everybody else, everybody's doing their own thing, it just doesn't work as efficiently as it possibly could, right? So you just have a bunch of big gaps. So the trick is to try to bring one regional effort in. And I'm not going to sit up here on this elevated dais and tell you that we've accomplished that, because we haven't, because it's hard work. But we are moving towards that. And once we get to a point, hopefully, where every jurisdiction and the counties, I should say, can buy into a number of universal agreements to say, we may not agree on everything, right? But we agree on these top 12. And those top 12 should be in everybody's housing elements. And those top 12 should be supported at every level possible. Then we'll be able to start moving forward in a quicker manner. And with the governor coming down somehow and saying, I'm going to make you responsible, communities, if you're not really meeting your housing expectations. I'm not quite sure what his carrot and stick is going to be yet, right? But something is going to happen, right? Something is going to happen. And I want to say that one of the, are you all in a jurisdiction or a county? Yeah? Okay. So let me just tell you from my perspective, and this is just my perspective, right? One of the biggest benefits that you can do is to really partner with your non-county, non-jurisdictional partners in your community, your nonprofits, right? Because as Alfred was saying, this isn't just about sticks and bricks. It's not just about how do you bring that unit online. It's also about services. When you're talking about housing homeless people, who up to 60% of that homeless population has mental illness issues, ongoing chronic issues, ongoing chemical addiction issues, you can't just throw people in a unit. You know, it doesn't work that way. You have to provide services. And those services are ongoing. For as long as that unit's going to be there, there's going to be services that are going to be necessary. And those services typically are not provided through an affordable housing developer or a county department or a city department. Usually they'll reach out and say, we want a homeless organization to run the services in this project, whatever it is, right? And a nonprofit has advantages and disadvantages, right, to a county or a jurisdiction. I'll do the advantages first because it's just better for me. The advantages are nonprofits are very nimble, right? They can typically make things happen much quicker than a jurisdiction or a county. Let me just ask this question. How many of you heard this when you've asked a question? I don't know, man. We got to run that through county council. Right? And then as you look at your date book and the months are going by, you're going, wow, man, did we ever get an answer from county council about that? And then what happens? County council says no, right? Well, a nonprofit has the ability to be more nimble in a lot of different things. Also, a nonprofit has the ability to be quicker, right? They can probably bring some things online much faster than you can, only because they're not bound by those levels of bureaucracy.
A month to write a board report.
Right. You know, that kind of stuff, right? So really, now what you have is you have deep capacity, right? And you have deep control and deep strength in that. So it's a great partnership. But what I see sometimes is that nonprofit organizations don't know their county or jurisdictional partners, and county and jurisdictional folks don't know their nonprofit partners, right? And so everybody's working in that silo land again, right? And it is hugely advantageous for me to be able to pick up the phone and call Anastasia Wyatt, right? When she used to work for the city of Salinas, and now when she works for the county of Monterey, and say, hey, it's Katherine, can we talk about surplus county property, right? And not have Anastasia say, who are you? And why are you calling me? You know, that is just really, really critical. So now let me talk about money a little bit. I mean, Jane really talked about money, so I'm not going to, you know, go down that with you. But just talk about homeless money in general. The supervisor is correct. When the HEAP announcement came, suddenly, the interest in homelessness just peaked. It was quite amazing, and it's still going on to this day. So our continuum of care, which is Monterey-San Benito counties, we're eligible to receive $12.5 million, right? Every community was very encouraged to look at their own priorities. For us, and every community has made their own, right? You know, for us, we've kind of bent the priorities into capital. And capital meaning, you know, to build it, buy it, rehab it, right? With a lot of priority built into sheltering people. And then there's also, you know, to a lesser degree, services and rental assistance and rapid rehousing. We're in our process now, right now, people are writing their grants, literally as we speak. Jill might be writing her HEAP grant right now, I don't know. She's got her computer out over there, right? But I will tell you that, you know, HEAP is strangely different than all other state or federal funding I've ever been involved with. You know, if you've ever been involved with HUD funding or ESG or CASH funding, things like that, you know, they're very regimented. You know, they tell you what to do, here's your RFP, blah, blah, blah. HEAP is like, you guys figure it out. You know, here's a broad box. They, you know, they want communities to acknowledge that this is public money, so you have to be responsible, and they're looking for you to bring things online that complement and coexist within your existing homeless service specter. But they're giving a lot of leeway to it. And they're really, I think, working from what I hear. I don't know if everybody's familiar with what's one of the things that are coming down next, which is hopefully, knock wood, the emergency shelter navigation center stuff that's in the initial budget. And from what I hear, they're looking to possibly push that money through the same way that they are pushing HEAP. So there seems to be initially a lot of good feelings at the state level about how HEAP is working. What's going to be critical is how communities deliver their outcomes with HEAP. Because as you know, HEAP is at this point one-time funding. June 2021, HEAP is over. The goal is that if all of our communities can come together and do great outcomes, maybe there'll be a re-upping of the HEAP program. And for us, the challenge and the goal is to be able to use HUD Continuum of Care money, HEAP money, CASH money, ESG money, hopefully no place like home money when it comes down the pike, because it's coming, and this other funding to try to work from the ground up and to be able to both build housing for people who are living 0 to 30% AMI, which represents homeless people and the poor in our community, right? And also to maintain the safety net on the ground, to make sure that our services are working, and to somehow in our area figure out ways for landlords to accept subsidized housing vouchers, because for us that is a huge challenge. We are a high rent, low vacancy area, and when you're a landlord and you've got 20 people in line at your door saying, hey, I want this apartment, and your homeless person is the last one in line, where's your financial incentive, right? We try to exploit every possible advantage that we can. We have been somewhat successful in HUD-VASH, which is especially for homeless veterans. I think we have 100 of those in our community, and I think they're all leased up at this point. But there's a reason for that, because you can sit down and you can talk to a landlord and you can talk about people who've served their country, right? Who honestly, have every reason to want to help them. It's a little more, it's a different conversation, when you're talking about, another challenge, right? It has taken us 1.5 years to lease up 100 set-aside vouchers, which our local housing authority graciously put online for us. But it took us that long because, again, not that we had few people who qualified, we had few people who would accept them. Somehow we have to figure out that gap, and that's a really difficult one. So, what can I say to you to motivate you and excite you? I can tell you that when Alfred and Jane say to educate yourself and educate your staff, I would say yes. And I would say do it one bite at a time. Because if you try to do the whole thing, you're just going to walk away, right? You're just simply not going to do it because it's so complicated. But reach out. If you are in this local area and you want to know more about that topic, they're sitting right here for you, right? If you want to know more about homelessness, contact me. If you're outside of this county, there are heroes just like these two in your county too. Reach out to them. And I just want to close because I want, in case anybody has any questions for anybody up here, in saying that, when you are when you're a 75-year-old woman and you've lost your housing because you lost your husband, right? And you don't want to tell your children who live out of state because you're too proud, because you don't want them to know that you need help from them, that when you're able to actually house that woman or that family or that person who is struggling, not only do you make a difference in that person's life for the rest of their lives, but you make a difference in your community's lives because your police department calls will go down. Your emergency room visits will go down. Your statistics for crime will go down, right? So you, sitting at your tables today, are as big a heroes as anybody else. So I ask you to pick up your sword, go out there, and just like Game of Thrones, make it count. So thank you.
All right.
So it takes dedication to come to these. And yes, Monterey is a great place to be. Thank you, Luis, for having an amazing county. But you have to have the passion and dedication to come and actually sit through this and listen and share what you know, learn what you didn't know and take it home. And now the hard job is doing something about it. And that's also for CSAC. Our job is to figure out where do we go from here. Obviously, this is a continuing conversation. But by just taking the small steps, we start making a difference. Yeah.